Perhaps it's meeting with Ron following worship and to talk about the situation in Uganda. And what is it that we could, perhaps giving up a piece of our time in order to benefit somebody else? What is it that we can do? Last night, over in the Valley Church, several of us gathered for a benefit. It was a coffee house, MCCLA and MCC in the Valley, and it was a benefit for the people of Haiti. And last evening, several of us were over there, and it was a wonderful evening of sharing music, but the primary purpose of being there last night was to share in a generous spirit, especially for the folks in Haiti, and specifically for folks living with HIV and AIDS in Haiti. You see, when the earthquake struck, the Red Cross goes in, and they take with them emergency medications to combat illness and disease that comes as a natural effect of disaster. But did you know, for instance, that on that list of emergency medications is nothing for those living with HIV and AIDS? And so last evening we gathered together to raise money for the Rainbow Fund, who will buy medications for those living with HIV and AIDS in Haiti, and will be sending that directly over there. 100% of the proceeds of last night will go directly to meet the needs of people living with HIV and AIDS last night. You see, that's about generosity. It means that we pull our resources. Not one of us could have afforded, I'm sure, to have sent all of that money across to Haiti to meet the needs of those living with HIV and AIDS. But when you pull our resources together, when you put all of that into the barn, then there's money enough to at least go part way to helping those living with HIV and AIDS in Haiti. The forgotten peoples, the peoples that are on the margins, the peoples on the side of society. Jesus says you cannot serve two masters. You can't serve God and money. Either you will love the one and hate the other, or you will adore one and despise the other. Well, we can replace that word money with all sorts of things in our lives. You can't serve two gods. You can't serve God and whatever it is that you or I find in our lives that sometimes takes precedent over God. And so the lesson for us today is about our greed and our generosity. And ultimately, we see that generous spirit first in God, who sent Jesus into the world. I mean, that was an act of generosity, sending God's only Son into the world so that we might have a living example of what it means to live generously. And Jesus certainly lived his life with a generous spirit. So I invite all of us, as we continue in this journey of Lent, to ask ourselves, where are the places that we are greedy? Where are the places that we have hoarded things for ourselves? And where are the places that we could find a generous spirit to share in community, to share in this world, to share so that the have-nots become part of the haves, and to embrace such a generous spirit that this world finally becomes like God's heaven. Because God's heaven is not a place where people get to hoard things. God's heaven is a place where all needs are met and all peoples find liberation and freedom. So let's continue on this journey. And today I pray that not whatever I've said from this pulpit has not made you feel bad about yourself, but rather I feel only that it lifts our consciousness to ask those difficult questions. And in asking those difficult questions, perhaps, just perhaps, we might do something different that will make us feel good. The song from Avenue Q that I most like is when they're collecting money to build a school for monsters. You can tell my mentality. And when they're collecting money for a school for monsters, somebody gives $1, and the recipient says, "Suddenly, I feel good." I truly believe that when we share from our generosity, there is something that blesses us. and thus continues the circle of life. May God bless us as we continue in this series of living applicably to the gospel that Jesus has given us. A few weeks ago I said that a sermon is never complete. It never ends until it's lived out in our lives.
All right.
And so I encourage you to complete this sermon for me as we live it out in the world, as the gospel message is written on our hearts, so that ultimately this world becomes a better place for you and for me. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you for your act of generosity, that you didn't just keep Jesus to yourself, but that you sent him into the world to live among us, and in living among us gave us a perfect example of generosity, of giving all that he was, even unto death. And so this morning, God, we ask ourselves, what is the greed, what is the thing in our lives that may be causing us to die spiritually? And if that is causing us to die spiritually, help us to give it up, so that we may move from that place of greed to a place of generosity, to a place of living in community. And so, God, now I pray that you would bless the words that have come from my mouth. May they not return to you without inspiring us, without making us think, without enabling us to live lives differently. And in that, O God, may we complete your word by becoming the people that you expect us to be. God's blessing upon each and every one of us as we do our best to follow Jesus. Amen.
Give them